The jungle held its breath as the sun dipped low, staining the Yucatán sky in molten orange. The young archaeologist, Elena Marquez, stood before a tangle of vines that concealed something solid. Her boots sank into the damp earth, her heart hammering louder than the chorus of cicadas. She had spent months wandering this forgotten stretch of forest, mocked by colleagues for chasing ghosts. But ghosts, she knew, sometimes left behind stone, and today her hands trembled against it. What she touched was no ordinary wall. Beneath the moss and roots lay cut limestone, the kind only ancient hands could shape. She tore away at the vines with reckless urgency, her breath catching when the outline of an entrance began to form. A carved lintel emerged, faint yet unmistakable Mayan glyphs etched with deliberate precision. Her throat tightened. Could this be the tomb she had long believed in but never dared to prove? In her mind, she heard the words of her professor back in Mexico City. The stories of a Mayan queen are folklore. Elena, you'd be better off studying pottery fragments. Yet here she was, standing before what could silence every doubt, every sneer. Her lantern's flame flickered, casting shadows over the symbols. She brushed dirt away from a single glyph, a woman's profile, her headdress towering like fire. A queen. Elena's chest ached with the force of realization. Still, a voice inside whispered, "What if it's nothing? What if they were right?" That doubt, seeded by years of dismissal, clawed at her. But another voice, fiercer, rose in her. "You are not wrong. They never looked where you dared to look." She pressed her palm against the cold stone, her lips parting in a vow no one else would hear. "I'll prove it. I'll show them." The jungle grew restless. A howler monkey roared in the distance, and the rustle of unseen creatures pressed in on her courage. But Elena did not step back. She lit a second lantern, placed it on the ground, and began to dig at the earth before the doorway. Hours passed. Sweat dripped into her eyes, dirt lodged beneath her nails, and her muscles burned. Finally, with a sharp scrape, her trowel struck stone. A threshold. Her pulse leapt. The weight of centuries pressed against her, as if the air itself carried warning. Legends of Mayan curses, whispered to her as a child, returned with unnerving clarity. Her grandmother's voice echoed, "The queen does not forgive the living who disturb her rest." Elena shivered, but pressed on. At last, she uncovered enough to crawl inside. The gap yawned before her, black and endless, smelling of damp earth and something older still, a stale breath of history itself. She reached for her lantern, her hand trembling not from fear alone but from the enormity of what she might find. As she prepared to step through, headlights cut through the trees behind her. She froze, her heart tightening. A jeep's engine roared, its tires grinding into the mud. She knew instantly who it was before the door slammed shut. Dr. Charles Whitmore, the man whose lectures filled auditoriums, whose name adorned half the journals Elena's own work was rejected from. Tall, silver-haired, and smug, he strode toward her with the air of a king surveying his domain. His smile was thin, patronizing, as his gaze swept from her mud-streaked face to the shadowed entrance. "Ah, Marquez," he drawled, his accent polished by Oxford halls. "Digging in the dirt again, I see. Let me guess, another wild goose chase?" Elena swallowed the fire that rose in her throat. She had imagined this moment, imagined standing at the edge of discovery while he dismissed her. But she hadn't imagined the satisfaction of watching his face when he saw the glyphs. She tilted her lantern upward, letting its glow reveal the carved headdress. For a fleeting instant, Whitmore's eyes widened before narrowing into disdain. "Interesting," he said coolly. "But don't get carried away. It's likely a storage chamber. Hardly the stuff of legend." Inside, Elena seethed. Storage chamber? He's afraid. He sees it too. The queen's gaze from the stone seemed to bore into both of them, her silent challenge echoing across the centuries. Elena gripped her lantern tighter, her resolve hardening. This was no longer just about discovery. This was about justice for herself, for the forgotten queen, for every truth dismissed by arrogance. She inhaled, steadying her breath. Tomorrow, the world might laugh again. Or tomorrow, it might change forever. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Dr. Charles Whitmore's life. The night pressed close as Elena stepped into the darkness of the tomb, her rival's shadow falling across the threshold behind her. The air inside the tomb was thick, stagnant, carrying the scent of soil long undisturbed. Elena's lantern threw weak circles of light against the limestone walls, revealing glyphs carved in tight sequences, their edges softened by centuries. Her breath came fast, each exhale clouding the fragile silence. She felt the queen's presence here, like a hand pressing gently yet firmly against her back, urging her deeper. Behind her, Whitmore ducked under the entrance with the ease of a man who never doubted he belonged in every sacred place. His boots struck the ground with arrogant confidence, echoing in the narrow corridor. He brushed invisible dust from his pressed khaki shirt and cast a smirk toward Elena. "Quite a cozy cavern you've found," he said, his voice smooth but laced with derision. "If we're lucky, maybe we'll discover a clay pot or two." Elena didn't respond. She traced her fingers along the glyphs, her lips moving silently as she read fragments of the Mayan script. Years of study had taught her patience, and where Whitmore saw nothing but scratches, she saw words blooming from stone. She murmured, half to herself, half to the walls. "A queen, eternal fire, protect the throne." Whitmore scoffed. "Poetic nonsense. You're seeing what you want to see. Real archaeology requires discipline, not fairy tales." Her chest tightened. For years she had endured this tone, dismissive, condescending. She could still see the university's lecture hall when he ridiculed her paper about female rulers in Mayan civilization, his laughter infectious enough to make the students chuckle along. That humiliation had burned, branding her. Now, standing here, she knew this was her chance to erase it. She steadied her lantern and said quietly, "She existed. They erased her, but she existed." Whitmore raised an eyebrow, his expression one of theatrical pity. "My dear Marquez, history isn't a canvas for your imagination. It's a science. You'll learn that someday, if you manage to publish anything credible." His words hit like stones, but this time, she didn't flinch. Instead, she pressed her palm flat against a panel of glyphs. Her mind worked through their sequence, the rhythms of the Mayan syllabary unspooling in her head. These weren't ordinary inscriptions, they had a flow, a rhythm, almost like poetry, and within them hid a warning. "Guardians of fire, silence the arrogant. The queen's throne lies beyond." Her heart pounded. It wasn't a mere wall, it was an entrance. The realization widened her eyes, but she kept her expression guarded. She could not let Whitmore see her excitement, not yet. Whitmore, however, noticed her hand lingering and stepped closer. He leaned in, his breath warm and unwelcome on her shoulder. "Whatever childish fantasy you think you're unraveling, I'll save you the trouble. This isn't a queen's tomb. At best, it's a minor noble's resting place. At worst, a dead end. Let me spare you the embarrassment." With that, he strode forward, deeper into the dark passage, his lantern casting harsh shadows that mocked her resolve. Elena clenched her fists until her nails dug crescents into her palms. His arrogance was unbearable, but part of her knew, without him here, her discovery would be dismissed. His reputation would make or break her truth. The corridor sloped downward, narrowing until their shoulders brushed damp walls. Insects skittered over stone, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed like distant footsteps. Whitmore stopped suddenly, raising his lantern to a carved lintel overhead. A grotesque face leered from the stone, its mouth open in a silent scream, eyes hollow and watchful. He chuckled, though his voice betrayed a quiver. "Ah, classic. The Mayans loved their theatrics. a guardian mask meant to frighten grave robbers, effective on the superstitious, I suppose. But Elena saw what he didn't. Around the mask, subtle lines formed a hidden pattern, like the spokes of a wheel. They weren't decoration, they were instructions. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments of Mayan engineering she had studied but never witnessed. This was more than symbolism. It was a lock. She whispered under her breath, "It's not a warning, it's a test." Whitmore turned, catching only the faintest of her words. "What was that, Marquez? Already inventing myths to impress yourself?" Elena met his gaze, fire sparking behind her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't shrink from him. She thought of her grandmother's stories, of every scholar who had dismissed the possibility of a powerful queen. This was no myth. The truth pulsed within these walls, waiting for someone who dared to believe. And though Whitmore strutted ahead, as if he owned the earth beneath his feet, Elena knew the tomb itself was watching, waiting to humble the arrogant. The passage narrowed until the air pressed against their lungs, thick and stale. Elena lifted her lantern, its glow licking across walls dense with glyphs. Unlike the decorative scripts she'd seen in textbooks, these seemed alive, curling and twisting into forms that told a story. She ran her fingertips across the grooves, her pulse quickening. Whitmore sighed loudly, his impatience echoing in the chamber. "We've indulged your fantasy long enough, Marquez. A few carved rocks do not make history." His tone was sharp, brittle, as though daring her to object. But Elena ignored him. The glyphs drew her in each line, humming with intent, each curve whispering a secret. She whispered fragments as she pieced them together. The queen, not buried, but enthroned, guarded by flame. Her voice trembled with awe. This was no funeral chamber. It was something greater. Whitmore snorted, but she caught the flicker in his eyes, the way his hand tightened on the lantern pole. Beneath the mask of arrogance lay unease. The chamber widened suddenly, swallowing them in an oval of shadow. Elena gasped as her lantern revealed stone reliefs etched floor to ceiling. A regal woman, with a towering headdress, arms stretched wide, her gaze defiant. Around her burned symbols of fire, drawn again and again, consuming warriors, devouring temples. A queen. Elena's throat tightened. This was her. The woman the elders whispered about, the ruler erased from records. She pressed a hand to the stone, feeling the weight of her own vindication. The whispers of doubt that had haunted her seemed to scatter like startled birds. Behind her, Whitmore approached, his expression caught between fascination and scorn. A dramatic representation, nothing more. Myths often inflate minor figures into phantoms of grandeur. Yet even as he spoke, his voice faltered. He lingered on the queen's carved eyes too long, as if they followed him. Inwardly, Elena smiled. "You see her too. You just won't admit it." As she studied the walls, her mind replayed the humiliation she had suffered years ago, standing in front of a crowded auditorium, presenting her theory of a hidden Mayan queen, only for Whitmore to laugh, calling her a romantic storyteller in an academic's clothing. The memory stung even now. But here, in the echoing dark, surrounded by stone testimony, his words dissolved into nothing. Her lantern revealed more lines of glyphs spiraling around the chamber like a riddle. She traced their path with her eyes, her lips forming syllables. "She who commands fire, silences kings, eternal." A shiver ran down her spine. Whitmore leaned in, his shadow stretching long across the wall. "Let me see." He shoved past her, his eyes darting over the glyphs, his jaw tightening. His arrogance cracked, if only for a second. Elena caught the flicker of recognition. He understood the script as well as she did. But admitting it meant admitting she was right. He masked his unease with a chuckle. "Creative reading, Marquez. You could make a fine novelist with this imagination." But his eyes betrayed him. He wanted the meaning, wanted to claim it. Elena stepped back, her voice steady. "You can deny me, Whitmore, but you cannot deny her." She pointed at the relief of the queen, her arms outstretched in defiance. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then, a sound stirred from deeper in the chamber, a low groan, like stone shifting under centuries of pressure. Dust rained from above, and the floor beneath their boots trembled faintly. Both froze. Whitmore's bravado faltered, his gaze darting toward the shadowed tunnel leading deeper still. "Settling earth," he muttered, though his voice was strained. Elena's heart thundered, but she recognized something more. The chamber wasn't crumbling, it was awakening. Her lantern flame sputtered, then flared as if fed by unseen breath. The glyphs seemed to shimmer, their carved edges glowing faintly in the trembling light. Elena felt it in her bones. The tomb was alive, and it demanded to be understood. She turned to Whitmore, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is no myth. This is her throne." And for the first time, Whitmore had no words. The air thickened with unease as they pressed deeper into the chamber, the silence broken only by the scrape of boots over stone. The walls narrowed again, and Elena's lantern cast long shadows that flickered like restless spirits. Each step felt heavier, as if the tomb itself were reluctant to be disturbed. Behind them, two local guides followed cautiously, their machetes tucked at their sides, their faces pale under the lantern glow. They had accompanied Elena for months, braving the jungle with her, but now their resolve wavered. One, Mateo, slowed and muttered under his breath in Spanish, "La maldición de la reina. Esto no es un lugar para los vivos." Elena turned sharply, hearing the fear in his tone. "It's just a story, Mateo," she whispered, though her own voice lacked conviction. "There's history here. We can't stop now." Whitmore, overhearing, barked a laugh that echoed unnaturally against the stone. "Curses? Spirits? Ancient queens rising from their graves? It's laughable superstition. I suppose you've filled their heads with your fantasies, Marquez?" he sneered, but his eyes darted toward the darkness ahead, with an unease he refused to admit. Mateo and the other guide exchanged worried glances. Their ancestors had spoken of this queen in hushed tones, not as legend, but as warning. Children were told never to wander near certain ruins, never to speak her name. Elena remembered those tales herself, her grandmother's trembling voice. The queen was betrayed in life, but her fire guards her still. Disturb her, and she will burn you in silence. The words coiled in her chest now, cold as stone. The path sloped downward into a second chamber, its entrance marked by twin statues, women carved from limestone, their faces stern, each holding a serpent coiled around an obsidian blade. The sight stopped everyone in their tracks. Even Whitmore faltered, his smirk briefly extinguished. Elena stepped forward slowly, lantern held high. The statue's eyes glistened with mineral deposits, like tears frozen for eternity. She shivered. These weren't guardians meant to terrify outsiders. They were protectors, fierce and loyal, a testament to the queen's command. Mateo whispered hoarsely, "We should leave. She doesn't want us here." His hand twitched toward the machete at his side, though he knew a blade was useless against the weight of spirits. Elena's mind wrestled between reason and belief. It's symbolism, she told herself, a show of power, a warning to intruders. Yet another voice whispered from deep inside, colder, older. "She is watching you." Whitmore, regaining his composure, strode past the statues with forced bravado. "Fear makes men see ghosts where there are none. These are simply artistic embellishments, Marquez, nothing more." But his gait was stiff, his shoulders tense. He felt it too. The chamber beyond was wider, its walls painted with faded murals. The flicker of the lantern revealed scenes of battle, warriors engulfed in flames, temples collapsing in fire, and a woman at the center, serene, her arms raised. She was no victim, she was the orchestrator. Elena's throat tightened as she studied the murals. "They feared her," she whispered, "but they also obeyed her. She wasn't erased because she was weak. She was erased because she was powerful." The guides refused to cross the threshold. They lingered at the statues, eyes darting nervously. Mateo clutched a rosary, whispering prayers. Whitmore snorted, but his face betrayed the strain of holding his arrogance. So the queen was a tyrant, hardly surprising. Female rulers often exaggerate their legacy. Elena turned on him sharply, her voice like a whip. Exaggerate? You dismiss every woman in history who dared to lead. Even in death you diminish her. For the first time, Whitmore flinched. The weight of her defiance hung in the charged air. Then, a sudden gust extinguished Elena's lantern. The chamber plunged into suffocating darkness. Gasps erupted. The guides cursed softly, scrambling to relight a torch. In the pitch black, Elena's breath caught as she heard it, a whisper. Faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. A woman's voice, ancient and low, curling like smoke. Leave or burn. Her heart seized. She spun toward the sound, though nothing moved. The darkness pressed against her eyes, against her skin, suffocating, alive. When the flame finally sparked again, throwing jittery light across the walls, the murals seemed changed. The queen's painted eyes gleamed, as if freshly painted, her gaze fixed on them all. Whitmore stood rigid, his jaw clenched, his face pale despite the mocking curl of his lips. Tricks of the mind, he said, though his voice wavered. Nothing more. But Elena knew better. The tomb had spoken. The chamber seemed to close in around them, every flicker of flame casting the queen's murals in restless motion. Elena's pulse hammered as she tried to steady her breath. The whisper still echoed in her skull, curling like smoke, refusing to be silenced. She glanced at Whitmore, whose pale face betrayed what his words would never admit. He had heard it too. The guides lingered near the threshold, their fear mounting. Mateo's voice was barely a whisper. She warned us, we cannot go further. It is death. Whitmore seized on their terror like a weapon. He strode toward them, his lantern swinging with theatrical bravado. Nonsense. Fear has poisoned your imagination. If you wish to abandon history for ghost stories, so be it. But understand this. He turned, his eyes narrowing at Elena. Whatever lies beyond will bear my name. The venom in his words chilled her. She had always known Whitmore was arrogant, but now she glimpsed something darker. Desperation. He wasn't just mocking her. He was terrified of being overshadowed. Elena clenched her jaw. He will not steal this from me. When she pressed her hand against the wall, tracing the spiraling glyphs, she realized they formed a path, not just decoration directions. Her stomach tightened with anticipation. She wanted to shout her discovery, to claim it before he did. But before she could, Whitmore pushed past her, his fingers brushing the same grooves as though he had understood them too. His lips curved in a thin smile. Fascinating. You see, Marquez, I've been reading these symbols as well. Did you think you were the only scholar in this room? Her eyes burned. He knows. He'll claim the key for himself. Whitmore turned toward the guides. Mark my words, gentlemen. History will remember this night as the night I, Dr. Charles Whitmore, uncovered the tomb of the Mayan queen. And you, he sneered at Elena, will be a footnote. Rage flared in her chest, but she bit it back. Words would do nothing. Only proof would silence him. The ground rumbled faintly, dust raining from above. The guides recoiled, muttering prayers. But Whitmore raised his arms as if the earth itself applauded him. His arrogance was suffocating, but beneath it, Elena caught another truth. He wasn't certain. The tremor had shaken him too, but he would rather gamble with curses than admit fear. That was when he made his move. While Elena studied the glyphs, Whitmore yanked her satchel from her shoulder. She gasped and reached for it, but he shoved her back with startling force. Her lantern swung wildly, nearly snuffing out. Your notes, he said, his voice sharp and hungry. He rifled through the pages, his smirk widening. You've done the tedious work for me. How convenient. Elena's stomach dropped. She lunged, but Whitmore held the satchel high, just out of reach. You think anyone will believe this discovery belongs to you? he sneered. "I'll have the journals, the universities, the world. And you," his eyes glinted with cruel triumph, "you'll vanish into obscurity, remembered only as the assistant who followed me." Her throat constricted. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, mocked, it was all crystallized in this moment, his hand gripping her life's work like a trophy. But then, from the shadows, Mateo stepped forward, his face tight with resolve. "Senor Whitmore, no man should steal from another. Not here, not in her house." He pointed to the Queen's mural, the painted eyes blazing in the lantern's glow. For a heartbeat, silence pressed in. Then Whitmore laughed, sharp and cutting. "Superstition has made you fools. I'll take what I want." Yet as he spoke, the chamber stirred again. The mural seemed to ripple, the Queen's image shifting subtly, her arms no longer raised in welcome, but in judgment. A shudder ran down Elena's spine. Whitmore faltered only for a breath before shoving the satchel under his arm. "Stay here then, and tremble. I'll find the chamber myself." He stormed into the darkness ahead, his lantern bobbing like a defiant star swallowed by night. Elena pressed her back to the wall, fury and fear burning inside her. He had betrayed her, stolen from her. But deep in her chest, beneath the despair, something fierce ignited. Resolve. The Queen's voice seemed to whisper again, clearer now. "The arrogant will fall. The faithful will see." Elena pushed off the wall, her fists clenched. She would not let him take this from her. Not him. Not ever. The tunnel dipped sharply, the air thick with the musk of earth sealed for centuries. Elena followed the faint, bobbing glow of Whitmore's lantern ahead, her own light casting a weaker halo that barely pushed back the darkness. Her satchel was gone, her notes in his grasp, yet her determination only sharpened. If the Queen's tomb held secrets, she would find them with her own hands, not through stolen pages. Whitmore's voice echoed back, smug and commanding. "You'll thank me later, Marquez. History needs names it can trust, and mine already carries weight. Your role is to watch." Elena's nails bit into her palms. "Watch? I've watched long enough." The tunnel widened suddenly into a domed chamber. Whitmore lifted his lantern high, and its light shimmered off obsidian tiles embedded into the walls. At the center stood a stone dais, its surface etched with spiraling glyphs. Carved serpents coiled up its sides, their eyes set with jade that glinted like fire. Elena froze, awe coursing through her veins. This was no ordinary chamber. It was a sanctum, a place meant to protect something sacred. Whitmore stepped forward with greedy reverence, his shadow stretching across the dais like a conqueror. "At last," he whispered, "the heart of it." He glanced back at Elena, his smirk cruel. "You must admit, I was right to take charge." But Elena wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the glyphs. Unlike the others, these were arranged in concentric circles, intricate and deliberate. They weren't decoration. They were a mechanism. Her mind raced through her studies of Mayan engineering, hidden doors, false chambers, puzzles designed to ward off intruders. She knelt, brushing dirt from the carvings. Her lips moved as she read aloud. "The throne lies where fire sleeps. Only she who knows humility may enter." Her pulse leapt. This wasn't just a tomb. It was a test. Whitmore snorted. "Humility? A quaint moral. History belongs to those bold enough to seize it." He placed his hand on the dais and pressed down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding roar, stone shifted beneath them. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passage lined with flickering orange light, as though flames had burned there for centuries. The guides gasped, crossing themselves. Mateo whispered, "Santa Maria." Elena's breath caught. The tomb had opened. Whitmore's grin split wide. "You see? The Queen herself acknowledges me. Step aside, Marquez. This discovery is mine." But even as he strode toward the passage, Elena noticed what he didn't. The glyphs beneath his hand had changed. Symbols of fire flared brighter in the lantern light, the grooves catching shadows that looked like licking flames. Her stomach clenched. The mechanism was more than a door. It was a judgment. She rose quickly, calling out, "Wait! You don't understand. It doesn't open for arrogance. It opens to test you." Whitmore turned, his expression darkening. "Nonsense. Fear has infected your logic. Stay behind if you're afraid, but don't lecture me." He disappeared into the passage, his lantern vanishing into the orange glow. Elena stood trembling at the threshold. Every instinct screamed that to follow him blindly was death. Yet leaving him meant losing everything: her discovery, her truth, her chance to reclaim her dignity. She drew a steadying breath and stepped forward. The air in the hidden corridor was hotter, charged as if fire truly burned in unseen veins through the stone. Along the walls, more murals revealed themselves. The queen seated on a throne, her hand raised in blessing to humble supplicants and in destruction to arrogant kings. The message was clear. The passage opened into a chamber unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Golden ornaments glimmered faintly in alcoves, their surfaces dulled by centuries but still radiating majesty. At the far end, a raised platform cradled an obsidian throne. Upon it sat a figure, skeletal yet regal, wrapped in tattered finery, her crown intact, her empty sockets staring out with terrible authority. The Mayan queen. Elena's knees nearly buckled. Here she was, undeniable proof of everything she had believed. Whitmore, already halfway to the throne, turned with wild triumph in his eyes. "Behold, Marquez, the world will speak my name with reverence for centuries. This queen is mine." But as his boots struck the steps of the platform, the chamber trembled. Dust rained down. Flames flared suddenly from braziers that had been cold for centuries, igniting with supernatural force. The queen's skull seemed to tilt, her jaw opening in a silent scream. Whitmore staggered, clutching his satchel tighter, his bravado faltering. Elena, rooted in both terror and awe, realized the truth. The tomb had not revealed itself to crown him. It had revealed itself to humble him. And the queen was only beginning her judgment. The chamber roared alive as the braziers erupted, their flames unnaturally bright, licking upward as though fed by unseen breath. Whitmore staggered back a step, his triumphant grin faltering, but pride forced him forward again. His lantern clattered to the floor, forgotten, as he clutched Elena's satchel tight against his chest like a shield. Elena stood frozen at the threshold, her heart pounding. The skeletal queen sat enthroned in eternal silence, yet the fire made her seem alive, her crown glimmering, her hollow sockets aglow with reflections of flame. The glyphs on the dais shimmered as if they too had woken, their carved grooves glowing faintly red. Whitmore raised his arms, his voice straining to sound confident, though fear edged every syllable. "Behold the last Mayan queen and I, Charles Whitmore, who have claimed her legacy." But his words clashed against the chamber, like stones hurled at iron. The queen's jaw, slack and broken by centuries, seemed to move, a hollow whisper threading through the air. "The arrogant will burn." Elena's blood turned cold. The guides cried out from the tunnel behind her, their voices quaking in prayer. Whitmore stiffened, his face draining of color, but he forced a laugh. "A trick! The air! The flames, illusions to frighten the weak." Yet as he mounted the steps of the dais, the flames surged higher, curling around him without touching Elena at all. The queen's throne radiated heat so intense it seared the stone itself. Elena's instincts screamed. She scanned the glyphs circling the dais, her mind racing. The message she had read earlier replayed in her head. "Only she who knows humility may enter." She shouted, her voice sharp over the roar of fire. "Whitmore, stop! It's a trial! You're not supposed to claim her! You're supposed to kneel!" Whitmore whipped around, his face twisted with rage. "Kneel? To superstition? Never! This is my moment, Marquez! Mine!" He reached the top step, stretching his hand toward the queen's crown. And the chamber screamed. The flames coiled like serpents, snapping at him, singeing his shirt, charring the satchel he held. He cried out, stumbling, yet still he reached forward, his pride greater than his fear. The crown glittered in the firelight, inches from his trembling fingers. Elena pressed her back to the wall, torn between horror and fury. He will destroy himself. He will destroy everything. Then her gaze fell to a small alcove beside the dais. There, in the stone, knelt a carved figure, a supplicant, humble, head bowed, her breath caught. That was the key. Not grasping, not claiming, submitting. Her grandmother's stories rang again in her ears. The queen demands respect, not conquest. Elena's knees trembled as she dropped to the floor. Her lantern light quivered against the carvings, and she bowed low, pressing her forehead to the cold stone. At once, the flames shifted. Their fury turned from her, pulling upward instead, wrapping around Whitmore in a fiery cage. He screamed, his voice breaking, his arrogance stripped bare. The satchel fell from his grip, bursting open on the stone steps, scattering Elena's notes in a flutter of ash-stained pages. His eyes met hers, wide, desperate, pleading, "Help me." But she could not. The queen's judgment had chosen its target. The fire engulfed his figure in a searing halo, and then, as suddenly as it had risen, it died, vanishing into silence. Whitmore collapsed to the dais, his body intact but broken, his hands blistered, his eyes vacant with terror. He was alive, but the fire had burned through his pride, leaving only shame. Elena lifted her head slowly, her chest heaving. The queen's throne glowed faintly, but the flames were gone. Only the silence remained, a silence, heavy with verdict. Her gaze swept the chamber, landing on the scattered notes at the foot of the dais. She gathered them with trembling hands, her eyes never leaving the queen's hollow sockets. The truth of the murals, the glyphs, the fire, all of it was undeniable now. This queen had ruled not with mere wealth or armies, but with knowledge and fear, a mastery that had made her eternal in legend. And history had erased her because her power frightened those who followed. Elena pressed her notes against her chest, a tear slipping down her cheek. They will remember you now. They will remember both of us. Behind her, Whitmore groaned, his pride shattered. His voice rasped, small and hoarse. It should have been mine. Elena did not answer. She rose to her feet, her resolve hard as stone. The queen had delivered judgment, and now the world would finally hear her story. Weeks later, the jungle had fallen silent again, vines creeping back over the carved stones, as though eager to bury the queen's secrets once more. But the world beyond the canopy was roaring. In Mexico City, the announcement of Elena Marquez's discovery thundered across newspapers and television screens. Mayan queen's tomb unearthed, history rewritten. Photographs of the murals, the throne, and the jade-eyed statues stunned scholars worldwide. The academic community buzzed with disbelief that quickly gave way to awe. For Elena, it felt surreal. She stood at the center of press conferences, lights flashing, microphones thrust toward her as journalists begged her to describe the moment she first stepped into the tomb. Each time, she spoke with reverence, not triumph. "I was humbled in her presence," she told them. "This queen commanded respect even in death. She deserves her place in history." The world listened. Articles no longer dismissed her as a dreamer. Instead, her name was spoken with admiration, attached forever to the queen who had been erased but not forgotten. Whitmore, meanwhile, had retreated into silence. Officially, he was listed as a member of the expedition. Unofficially, whispers spread quickly of his breakdown inside the tomb. Some said he had fled screaming. Others claimed he now spoke of hearing voices in the flames. He resigned from the university within the month, his reputation collapsing under the weight of rumor and humiliation. Elena never sought revenge. She had no need. His arrogance had destroyed him more thoroughly than she ever could. One evening, weeks after the discovery, Elena returned alone to her grandmother's modest home. The old woman sat waiting, her frail hands folded in her lap, eyes shining with both pride and sorrow. "You found her," her grandmother whispered. "Yes, Elena replied softly. She knelt beside her, taking her hands. She was everything you said. Powerful, defiant. They tried to erase her, but she endured. Her grandmother's eyes filled with tears, and now, because of you, the world will remember. That night, as Elena lay awake, she replayed the queen's whisper in the dark chamber. The arrogant will burn. The faithful will see. It had been more than a curse. It was a lesson, one that had burned itself into her heart. The queen's tomb was not merely a discovery of relics. It was a mirror, reflecting the cost of pride and the quiet power of humility. Elena understood now her years of doubt, her humiliations. Her perseverance had prepared her for that chamber. Whitmore had seen the tomb as conquest. She had seen it as truth. That was the difference. In the months that followed, scholars traveled from every corner of the world to study the artifacts, to decode the glyphs, to marvel at the murals that revealed a forgotten chapter of Mayan history. Elena guided them with patience, always reminding them, respect her. She is more than bones and stone. She is memory. Standing once more before the throne, now carefully preserved under protective glass, Elena felt the queen's presence as vividly as on that first night. The flames no longer roared, the whispers no longer echoed, but the judgment lingered in the silence. She bowed her head, just as she had done in the trial chamber. And in that quiet moment, she knew she carried the queen's legacy, not just the discovery, but the lesson carved into fire itself. Humility is stronger than arrogance, and respect is more enduring than conquest. The world had been shocked, yes, but Elena was changed. She turned from the throne with tears in her eyes, whispering to herself, "They will remember you, my queen, and through you, they will remember me." If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.